Hey guys, welcome back to the Bible.
It's a podcast where we talk about our questions, our things that we want to know more about the Bible, and we go back to the Bible to study about them.
I'm Julietta.
I'm Lisette.
And I'm Kaylin, and today we are talking about love versus lust and kind of what that means, right?
Yeah.
So, as our starter question for today, are you guys ready?
I forgot about the starter questions.
It's a very simple question, but it's what is lust? Like, technically, like, what is lust?
Okay, well, I'll start.
Okay,
Typically,
go ahead.
lust is seen as like sexual, physical, like sins that people fall into. But lust can be any sin or like sinful desire that we have, like literally for anything. And I feel like that's not noticed enough.
Yeah, I agree. I think it can be used in the context of sexual desire, but it can also be lust for money or lust for other things. I have the actual definition, which is a very strong sexual desire or a passionate desire for something. And then the theology definition is a sensual appetite regarded as sinful.
I have it written down as a sinful desire or something that, like, when you have a strong feeling or desire to do something, right? And I think when I was doing my research, the first thing that I saw pop up was in First John 2:16, and it talks about the three different types of lust. So, I mean, there's three types there, and I guess we're going to dive into each and every one of them. But the first one is lust of the flesh. Anybody want to just say what that means?
Okay, so
Yeah.
what I have written down right now for lust of the flesh, it's like many things that like are what our body wants, what our body desires, the things that our body can get like caught up into. And examples are like adultery, drugs, alcohol, like overeating habits and like stuff like that. Well, it says food, so I'm assuming like eating pork and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Or like just overeating. And I think in our last episode we talked
Yeah,
about
we
like
did.
unclean or not like unhealthy eating and like not taking care of
Yeah.
yourself. It's more of like your actions and like things that you're physically doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like for like lust of the flesh, it's a lot of stuff. It's like a lot of physical desires that are contrary to the Bible. It's not just premarital sex or like lustful thoughts and all that kind of stuff. Like that's more of physical things that the world also has to offer.
And I saw in Romans 13:11 through 14, it talks about putting on the armor of God and making no provision of the flesh. So like you don't, as Christians, like it's very easy to fall back into the things that we're used to, like our routine, when like it's contrary or like it doesn't fall in line with the things that of God, I guess. And so that becomes like the divide between like, do I follow what I'm used to or do I follow what God is telling me? And I saw a quote that says, like, a man has no problem smoking cigarettes until the day he tries to quit. And that, like, I think it falls in line with, like, the lust of the flesh. Like, it's more of, like, a physical thing, something that, like, you can touch, you can feel. It has to do with your actions. And that becomes very dangerous.
Yeah, and like I feel like I heard someone said this once. It was at a sermon at Forest Lake, I'm pretty sure. But someone or the pastor preaching that day, I don't remember who it was, it just stuck out to me that they said that like once you learn how to do something or once you experience something, it's so hard to stop because you already know how that feels.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's why in the Bible there's so many things that like God tells us not to do. And like people are just like a lot of other people that aren't like Christian, they'll see it from outside view, they're like, oh, these are all rules.
Yeah.
But like these are all reasons why like he has all that stuff written down so that we don't fall into lust of the flesh. Because once you know how something feels, it's so hard to forget about it and not want to do it again. That's the whole reason why it's lust of the flesh.
I think, in Galatians 5, it talks about what we were just saying, like how there's like different types of like sexual or not different types of lusts.
Yeah.
And so it talks about sexual immorality and all that stuff. But at the end, it says, I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. And so I think that overall, like we can say that all the types of lusts are bad. But if we don't look at the consequence or if we look at the consequence, then we'll realize how bad it is or what it will lead to.
Yeah.
And so it'll cause us to stop, you know? And so how you were saying when you're introduced to something, it's hard to stop it. But then you have to think, like, I'm not going to inherit the kingdom of heaven. And then that'll make you, like, take a few steps back.
And like after you overcome like the difficulty of forgetting about something that like you once like knew or whatever or like anything like that, I feel like that's when your eyes are more open to realizing, like, there's a reason why God tells us not to do these things.
Yeah.
Because it distracts you from inheriting his kingdom. It distracts you from so many things. And I feel like lust of the flesh is so much harder to overcome than, like, lust of the eyes. When it comes to, like, living in this world, that's definitely like a little harder because there's so many things that, like, you're seeing all the time that can be offered to you.
And it's easy to fall into addiction too. Like, especially a lot of times we see, like, people who fall into addiction with, like, alcohol and drugs and all this stuff. Like, once you start it, it's like this feeling that you can't stop. And that's where it becomes really dangerous because you know this feeling and you know, like, how good it feels in the moment. But then when you experience what God offers, you're like, wait a minute. Yeah. Now what do I do?
Because it's so easy. The stuff that, like, the devil has to offer and the world has to offer is so much easier to go into than it is, like, dedicating yourself to reading the Word of God or, like, getting closer with Him. It's so much easier to fall into those, like, lusts of the flesh than it is to really, like, pay attention to God's.
I think it's because it's, like, a carnal nature. I think we say, like, fleshly desires, but I think, like, a lot of people can confuse it because they're kind of like, oh, well, God came into his flesh and, like, you know,
which it's interesting you say that because he was tempted too.
Yeah.
He was,
and so that means that, like, his flesh was basically like, you know, because he was human. But I think that it isn't necessarily that we're human and that's because we sin, because God was human, but that didn't mean he sinned. Yeah. It's just that he didn't follow his carnal desires. And so with that, it can be many different things. Like music, it doesn't, because it's worldly, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad. You know what I mean? Because a lot of people will say, like, oh, well, worldly music, but, like, Happy Birthday is worldly. And, or, like, wait, what's the word?
Like typical Christmas music. Too.
No.
Secular.
Secular. Yeah. Secular. That means it's of the world, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad because it's not carnal, you know? Yeah. And so, like, it means that it's not necessarily our flesh, like our actual literal flesh, but it just means, like, our carnal nature that kind of is always calling us to do these things. It's like the part of us that isn't the spirit.
Yeah, and, like, going back to how, like, Jesus was our, like, flesh, but he didn't sin. It back again in 1 John 2:16, the same verse, but at the beginning of it says, "For the world offers only a craving for physical pleasure." So, like, the world is what's offering us all these physical things that seem so cool and so fun to do. And since, like, it's our nature to fall into those because it's just so easy to go to, so easy to fall onto those things.
And I, like, overall, it's important to know, like, this is something I was told as a kid, but, like, your actions speak louder than words. Meaning, like, what you do will override what you say. And I think as a lot of times as Christians, like, I myself, I may say, like, oh, don't do that, like, this isn't good for you, like, you shouldn't do this and that, but then I do it too. And, like, same thing with, like, unhealthy eating. Like, I may say, like, oh, you shouldn't eat that, but then I myself fall into that temptation. So it's, like, it's also keeping in mind that your actions speak for yourself, and, like, it depends on what image you want to show to the world and what you're trying to show other people. I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah, it does.
With that, I kind of feel like that kind of goes with what you consume because it's what people see you consume. But then there's a sermon here, and it was about the 5 senses, and I think everyone, like, remembers it because there was, like, a Shakira picture. Yes, like, he was talking about.
I have a picture of that.
Yes. I feel like everyone knows what I'm talking about. Like, I'll mention it. Remember the Shakira picture? They're like, yeah, I remember that sermon. And the pastor was talking about how the 5 senses are, like, the ways to your spirit.
It's like the entry points.
Exactly, correct. And so it's basically like what people see you touch, what people see you smell, what people see you look at and stuff. It's not only about your image outside, but it'll also affect you and, like, it'll lead you to sinful activities. And so I think that kind of leads us into the next.
It does. It perfectly does, because the next point that in 1 John that he mentions is the lust of the eyes. And honestly, like, what does that mean? And the research that I did said, like, the lust of the eyes is everything that we see, like, what you're watching, what you're, like, engaging your eyes and your mind to, really, because, like we said in the other podcast, your brain is very important. Like, your brain is very, like, receptive, and if you're not careful with the things that you watch, the things that you're putting into yourself, it will lead you to make decisions. And a perfect example of this was David and Bathsheba. And if for those who aren't familiar with the story, David was this king. He conquered Goliath. Like, he was a very strong guy in his faith. Like, he had very strong faith. Like, he believed in God, and he conquered a lot. But the one time, I don't know if it was the one time, but one of the times that he sinned was because he was at the top of his, like, little palace, and he was looking over, and he saw this girl taking a shower on her roof. And in his head, he was like, wait a minute, like, she's really pretty. I want her for myself. And that started with your eyes. It started with that entry point, like you were saying. He saw her, and that led him to make this decision, and that desire led him to fall into this temptation. And it ended up with murder. It ended up with hurt.
Yeah.
It ended up with so much more damage, a lot more consequences. So that's why it's important to be careful with what you see and what you're, like, putting into your mind.
Yeah. What I have written down for, like, lust of the eyes, it's the want for money, material possessions, certain appearances, and looking at someone lustfully.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like those are the things you see on a daily basis, and those things are so quick to ruin your life the way it did for David. Like, those little things that you're like, I wish I looked like that, or oh my gosh, he's so attractive, like that kind of stuff. That can be turned into so many negative ways for your life, and like, you don't even realize it until it's too late.
Absolutely. And, like, in the romantic aspect, it's not necessarily like, oh, he's cute. It's more of like,
yeah, like,
I want him.
Yeah,
like,
that kind
he's
of
for
stuff.
me and only for me. Like, it's more of like this is mine. And in the 10 Commandments too, the last commandment says, "Thou shalt not covet," meaning, like, you shouldn't want what your neighbor has. Like, and in the Bible goes on to saying you shouldn't have what you shouldn't, like, desire for what your neighbor has for your neighbor's wife. It goes on to this list, but that falls specifically into that lust of the eyes. Seeing something that isn't yours and then wanting it to be yours, that falls into, it's like you're falling into a trap.
And it also, like, if depending on how bad you want it, it's gonna distract you from God, because you're gonna simply try to achieve that. You're gonna forget that God gives you the things that you need. God gives you the things that He thinks is fit for you, and you're gonna go out of your way. You're gonna try so hard to go out of your way to find the things that those other people have, because you want to live like that, or you want that for yourself. And that's the kind of stuff that slowly tears apart, like, our lives.
Yeah.
And, like, I feel like people don't realize it enough. Like, when you're seeing the way other people are in life, and you're like, oh, I want to be like them, that immediately is kind of like, okay, but God made you this way for what? Right. You know, God made you, surrounded you with these people. God made you this appearance. God made you, like, want these certain things just for you to try to, like, you steer away from Him because you're trying to change your life, but that's not the way He has it written for you.
And there's a difference between admiration and desire.
Yeah.
Admiration is like, wow, like, it's a more of a genuine, like, I am proud of you for doing this. Like, I'm so glad that you've reached, but it comes from a genuine point.
Yeah.
Whereas this, like, this place of, like, coveting and this place of lust, it's jealousy. Like, oh, I see that they have that, like, I want to do it better than they do.
Yeah.
Which it's also part of, like, the third part of this verse, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, like, it's very easy to get caught up in what your eyes are seeing and what you're kind of, like, I don't want to say doing with your eyes, but, like, what you're focusing on.
Yeah.
And something important to know is that when you lust of the flesh, it's easy for someone else to see you doing it and being like, and, like, having that word of advice. It's easy for someone when you're, like, physically doing something and, like, other people can see that you're committing this action. Other people, like, can come to you and be like, hey, like, maybe you shouldn't do this. Like, maybe you should do this. But the lust of the eyes is all up in your brain. Like, a lot of times, like,
dangerous
it's very dangerous, and people don't see what's going on in your brain.
Yeah. And I think we're, like, focusing on, like, oh, I need to have that. But there's, like, other ways that your eyes will cause you to, like, go into other sinful activities. It doesn't necessarily have to be, like, oh, I see you and, like, I want you, even though it has to do a lot with that. I think that just, like, watching other people do stuff, it's kind of like, wait, I want to try that now. Wait, I want to do that.
And then also, like, it gives you such a bad look on what intimacy should look like after marriage. Like, what does God actually want intimacy to look like for you? And people, once people, like, there's even, like, from a not religious point, there's so many, like, people that they say this, and then, like, watching that simply destroys your relationships because that's what you think it should be like.
You create an expectation. And honestly, like, in anything that has to do with, like, romance or, like, any, like, sexual connection, that's chemical too. Yeah. So it's like, it's not even like, oh, God is telling, like, obviously it's very important to hear what God is saying, but if you want, like, second opinion, I guess you could say. It's a chemical thing. Like, science has also proven that, like, it creates this bond with people, or like and it ends up hurting you than helping you.
Yeah, it does. It really does.
Oh, there was a
Yeah.
verse. There was a verse. I don't think we were gonna say it, but it was like, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go to hell. And I think that's like a very like
It's
dramatic.
very dramatic.
Yeah. It is very dramatic, but at the end, it's kind of like your body parts. If they're gonna like you. How do I say it? It's not literal. Like you're gonna throw them out. Like
Or
you're
actually
gonna
cut it
them
off.
out. Yeah. But if your body parts are gonna cause you to lead, are gonna cause you to end up in destruction, that means that you have to like do something about it.
Change
You
the way
know?
your life- and
Exactly.
and it's not even like your actual body parts. It could also be the things, the people you're surrounding yourself with.
Mhm.
If those are the
Absolutely.
people that are causing you to fall into these sinful desires, cut them out.
Mm-hmm.
Which, like, again, going back to what you said earlier, your senses, like your eyes, your hands, your everything that you do is an entry point into your soul and into like your, and it sounds dramatic, it really does, but at the end of the day, like everything that you see, everything that you experience, everything that you're surrounded by ends up affecting who you are. And in that verse, it's like, it's saying like, if your eye is causing you to do this, like take it, gouge it out. Don't
That's a bit
gouge out your
dramatic.
eye.
Yeah.
It's dramatic, but it's there to show you that if your eyes are very receptive, and like it's gonna, your eyes is kind of like, it's gonna lead you to do something. Like I had written down earlier, like it starts off with this temptation, like the lust of the eyes, or like thinking about doing it, which leads to a desire, which leads to like, I want to do this, which then causes you to lead into sin. And then sin ultimately leads in death. So it's something to keep in mind when you're going about your daily life, and like thinking about like, I have to be careful with the things that I'm watching, with the things that I'm surrounded by, the things around that I'm doing, that I'm taking action in, because it will all affect me at some point.
Yeah.
And now, the third part of the verse talks about the pride of life. And that, what does that mean? Well, the way that I saw it is more of like this desire for praise, recognition, applause, status, and advantage, which is really in turn like arrogance. It's like this, like, you want this self-praise, which causes a lot of damage because it can break relationships. It can break the way you think about yourself. Like, it can cause a lot more things. So be careful about that. But yeah, like all these three things that are mentioned as like different types of lust, different types of things that can cause us and lead us to temptation and lead us to sin. And we talked about a little bit about how to combat it by separating yourself, by standing like away, like if you have to remove or like talk about it. But what other ways can we choose love and choose God over our lust and our like carnal desires?
Okay. What do you want
Yeah,
to
you
start?
can go ahead.
Okay, I feel like we should keep in mind what the true definition of biblical love is. Like in 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4-7 says, "Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance." And I feel like if we live by that, it'll be easier to like differentiate lust and love.
Mhm.
Lust typically doesn't really bring a lot of good for your life. I was trying to refine the Instagram post, but in the Instagram post that I had seen discussing love versus lust, it said that lust brings pain. Lust eventually will bring like competition in a way. Like, I don't remember the word that they used, but yeah, if it doesn't align with God's word, then it's truly not from him, basically.
And it hurts after a while. Like, you get tired of this, and it, like, you lose your energy and motivation to do things because you're so like full of this like desire, when it really isn't coming from a place of love.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the times it'll start with like confusion and stuff. Like, have you seen those where it's like, if it's from God, it won't give you confusion. If it's from God, like, you'll be sure if it's from God. And I think that's like the early stages of like you're experiencing something new or you want something. Like, usually lust and love has to do with relationships, and so I think it takes a lot of like evaluation, and you kind of get to see like, well, am I confused about this? Is it really making me happy, or is it kind of like a pastime, you know?
Yeah.
And it is like, you'll know, but it takes a lot of asking God to like help you figure it out and really see if it's love or lust. And to understand the difference, you have to study both. Like, you have to know what lust is and you have to understand what love is. If you don't know what love is and you don't know what lust is, it's easy to confuse them.
Yeah, like in my notes I have dog. In my notes, I have that like, sexual pleasures and relationships are super normalized. Like, people don't realize what physical intimacy really should seem like, and they don't realize that it's like it's not necessary right now. Like, as soon as you're dating somebody, you don't need to think about having sex or any of that stuff. That stuff is meant to wait for a reason. Like, God gave you a reason to put off the sexual intimacy later, so you can. I feel like that way it's easier to differentiate if it's biblical love or not. Because you can be so excited, have so much fun in a relationship, doing all the worldly stuff, the things that everyone normalizes and things that you should be doing, and then that prevents you from seeing, like, what biblical love is.
And I feel like in that, sorry to cut you off, but, like, in that aspect, like, you create this, like, attachment, and, like, you think this is something coming from God, like, you think this is love, but at the end of the day, your ideals, your morals, they don't align, or, like, other things happen, and then you end up hurt. Like, it may seem fun in the moment, but there's a lot more things to consider, specifically in relationships, because like, ultimately, like, marriage is a lifelong thing. Yeah. Like, you want it to be a lifelong thing, and there's a lot of things to consider when it comes to relationships, and not even just relationships, but commitments in general. When you're going to commit to something, you have to fully commit to it and not just have it come from a place of, like, oh, I'm going to do it just because I want to do it. Should come from a place of, this is what God wants me to do, and this is what I feel like this is going to be right for me.
Yeah, I feel like with the way that society puts everything, it's so normalized to get caught in the things that, like, feel good. Mm-hmm. And, like, that's how we ultimately get confused and stuck, and, like, we fall into the sinful desires of the world because it feels good. Mm-hmm. So it should come from God because it feels good. But that's wrong. Just because it feels good doesn't mean it's from God.
A lot of the time it's just normalized, and so we think it's okay. Like, hookup culture is really normalized, where you just kind of have sex with someone and then you just move on and you move on. But really, like, you just have to go into the Bible, and, like, you'll find that, like, marriage and the sexual desire, like, it's mentioned a lot because it's gonna bring you to be one flesh. And so if we're just going around, or there's like a quote, it's like, if we, like, have sex with everyone, then we're going to have little parts of everyone, and then we're never going to be really ourselves.
That's actually what my science teacher said to me. Like, in that one talk, Mr. Geigel said that same thing. He literally was like, you're going to have little parts of everybody if you're just going around.
And I feel like we're talking about, like, this, like, oh, like, it feels good when you talk about lust. But when you fully encounter Jesus, and you fully have, like, that Jesus moment, and you fully have that relationship with him, that feels great.
Yeah, like, even better.
No, I feel like after that, you're going to, like, want to stop. And then you're going to realize what true love is.
You experience this true love.
Exactly.
And, like,
I'm sorry. It's like what you were saying, how, you, like, when you're introduced to someone, or introduced to something, it's hard to, like, get away from it. I feel like it's the same thing with Jesus. Like, once you see, like, when he shows you true love, and it's going to be hard to accept any other type of love. And even if you were, like, stuck in, like a hookup phase, or, like, whatever it is, I feel like God can, like, make you clean again.
There's still hope for you. No matter what, there's always hope for you. Yeah. And, like, I recently got rebaptized this year, and to me, like, I felt this peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. And I guess, like, our testimonies can be another episode. But when you truly, like, accept Jesus, and you truly find who Jesus is and how Jesus can live within you, you feel this peace, and you feel this calmness, this, like, this serenity that you don't feel in other places. But because we are flesh, we constantly look for that in other places. Because I think if you have had some sort of walk with Christ, you know that once you decide to follow Jesus, everything will try to get in your way between you and Jesus. And because you have experienced that before, it becomes so hard to still stay on that path and choose Jesus instead of like having that like little pleasure here and there. I don't know if like that makes sense, but at the end of the day, like they say this quote a lot, and I've heard it a lot of times. There's always two paths, choosing God and choosing the world. And when you're choosing God, this path may not look the best. It's hard. It's a hard journey, but at the end of the day, you reach salvation. Yeah. You reach this eternal life with God. But when you see this other path, like from the get-go, it looks beautiful, like it looks like so much fun. But once you keep going down that path, you reach this destruction, you reach like hurt, you reach like this feeling of emptiness. So it's hard. It's a hard decision to make, because do you want to wait it out in the long game and like go along this really hard path, or are you just gonna get instant pleasure but then lead into like hurt?
Yeah, I feel like what we can remind ourselves, like, everything worldly is temporary. Yeah. Like, people, like, have fun drinking, then, like, years later, and they don't stop, years later, they end up with some type of problem. Or people, like, have so much fun smoking, like, cigarettes and stuff, years later, they have some type of problem. Mm-hmm. And, like, it may seem, like, it's temporary. It may seem fun for years. Like, years are like, oh, this is so much fun. Like, this looks amazing. Like, this looks like something I totally want to do for the rest of my life. Then the consequence catches up to you.
Lung cancer is not fun.
Yeah. God is not going to, the same way God won't give you answers right after you ask for help, it's not the same way he's not going to give you the consequence right after it happens. So everything worldly is temporary. Eventually that consequence is going to catch up to you. Yeah. And I feel like people get so caught up in, oh, this is fun in the moment, but then they're like, oh, I regret doing that. But like with God, it's a little difficult at first, but then there's no regret after. After that, you're from with him, you enjoy your life.
You have no reason to regret it, because you feel like, once again, you feel this peace, you feel this love and compassion coming from God, and at the same time, you are able to share that to other people. Yeah. You're able to like get what you're feeling from God and then share it out to other people, which at the end of the day, that's the ultimate goal. Yeah. Continue sharing God through your own experience, really. And something that you mentioned about, like, drinking and smoking, the Bible doesn't explicitly say, like, you can't drink or you can't smoke. But at the end of the day, you're hurting your temple. You're hurting your body. You're, like, I keep plugging the last episode, which you guys should watch. But at the end of the day, you're hurting yourself. And like I said, you have two roads, two decisions. You're going to end up hurting yourself than helping yourself. When with God, like, yes, you're going to have issues, and yes, you're going to go through the fire. Yes, you're going to stumble and fall along this path, but you have God to help you through it. He's there to hold your hand through this path, which is so much more rewarding than it is this other path. Yeah. But yeah, so any last comments?
I think we're okay.
Yeah. I think it's just important to remember that lust may feel good in the moment, but it's not at the end. And if you're currently struggling with it, it's important to talk to someone about it. It's important to be open and vulnerable about it, because we all struggle with it. Yeah. I struggle with it. They struggle with it. And, like, it's something that happens to everybody, because it's our flesh and it's our own desires to do that, like our human nature. Yeah. But when you talk to someone, it creates your own accountability, really, and helps you, like, really internalize that this is not what I want for my life. And also, another quote that I heard was, sin thrives in darkness. Like, when you start talking about it and opening it up, you're allowing yourself for God's light to help you and give you that clarity and fight through this desire. So don't forget that. And also, like, just nurture your relationship with God. It's so important when you have these two options of choosing love over lust. But at the end of the day, God's the only one who's going to give you clarity. He's the only one that's going to help you through it. And that's what you kind of can use to go through these moments. So don't forget that. And also put on the armor of God. Yeah. So thanks for watching.
That's all for today. Watch the next one, or tune into the next one.
Yeah. And watch the last episode if you haven't watched it. So let us know. And don't forget to go back to the Bible.
And then down in our description, we'll have our verses and our conclusions for today. So you guys can look into it. All right.
Okay, bye.
Boss.
Let's go. Okay.
Okay. Hey guys,
Wait, so are we gonna say, hey guys?
welcome to back
to the
welcome back to
the
Bible.
I'm so excited we can finally say that.
Yes.
And I'm gonna go click that green button.
Exactly. No.
Welcome back to the Bible.
We go back to the Bible.
And get real deep. And we dive into the Word of God.
Okay, I'm not gonna say that.
I'm Julieta.
I'm Julieta.
Juliana. Yo soy Lisette.
Do I look
Versus
bald?
lust. You always look bald.
You're like balding. Why am I not in the picture, Julieta?
Like, what do you want me to do?
Why is your camera dirty?
It's
Mine?
filthy.
You look oily.
That's rude.
Wait.
Okay, 3,
That's it.
2,
Wait.
1.
No, I thought you were still doing the thumbnail.
You weren't. Please
Okay,
not
ready?
pretend-
Thumbnail. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
Okay, ready, guys?
Yeah.
3, 2, 1.